I left my flame in the other room, but
It's okay.
later afterwards, know that the torch is getting passed.
Cool. Please feel free to drop in the chat your name, your pronouns, or any identity info you want to share, where you're joining us from, if you're working on a campaign or an organization, which one you're working on, and what has you fired up right now. Or if you prefer, what song matches your personality?
Ooh, hard question.
Rock and Rockdale.
In many moods. Hey, Katie, Tennessee, what up? Hey, Candace, good to see you.
Yeah. Florida, Texas, Tennessee.
It's basically just the South in the house tonight.
No, I've got Philly,
Okay.
right?
Oh, we did get
Someone said
Philly.
Philly,
In
yeah.
Ohio.
All right. Keep it going. Jessica, are you ready to get started?
I am.
All right, let's jump in.
Cool, welcome. Like we said, this is the like unofficial start to the GOTV workshop series. If you have yet to apply to or register for the GOTV workshop series, there's still time, and we will share information about that in the chat. But for right now, we want to get started and get into our content session, the contents of our session. So my name is Jessica, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Deputy Training Director here at Arena.
And I am the other person in the other picture. I'm Jess Weldon. I'm the training director at Arena.
Cool. And what are we doing here this evening? We are going to go over a couple goals, understanding the campaign phases and the distinct goals of GOTV. We're going to understand how campaigns approach planning for GOTV. And we're also going to help you determine which GOTV workshop series sessions will answer any remaining questions you might have. So this session is really to give you an overview of GOTV, and we'll really dive more into the specifics of planning during the workshop series this week. That said, as we go through, please feel free to share any questions you have, and you can use the Q&A function. Cool. So I'm going to really briefly cover campaign strategy. So if you could drop in the chat, how do you win an election? How do you win an election? Let's see, what have we got? Organized people, hell yeah. More votes than the other side, get the right people to the polls, communication, raising money, consistent outreach, and then building excitement and momentum for your candidate. Yes, 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 to all of these things. And a double plus to what Ryan said here, which is 50% plus one. If you are a grad of Arena's trainings, you have seen this slide many a time. So 50% plus one. This is our win number, and each campaign creates a pathway to victory plan based on their district to get to that 50% plus one. And so what are campaigns doing? They are using tactics, these specific methods that are part of a strategy to get us closer to our win number. So television, mail, virtual events. When we think of campaigns, we often think about these things. We think about ads, we think about press, all the text that you're likely receiving right now. So these are all the things that we see and interact with as voters, as how we interact with a campaign. And each one of these tactics is part of a bigger strategy on how a campaign plans to win. Cool. So briefly going through our campaign phases. So a campaign has three distinct phases. So we start with our capacity building phase, which is happening from the start of the campaign through the end. So this is the part of a campaign where we are writing plans, hiring, building a talent pool, onboarding, building relationships, fundraising, and doing staff development. So organizers often build movements over the course of years, but campaigns do this in that much shorter timeline. So making sure that we're maximizing the time that we have. And then we have persuasion. So this is a time when campaigns will be doing staff development, planning execution, program adaptation, hiring, onboarding, and strengthening relationships. So again, campaigns know how many voters they need to persuade. They know that 50% plus one number. So during this phase, the campaign might identify who might vote for their candidate and attempt to have meaningful conversations during that time. And then turnout. Turnout is when we have the most urgency. All the program of the campaign shifts. There's staff turnover. There's the October surprise. So this is where we're going to focus our time this evening, thinking about turnouts. And during each phase of the campaign, we're also talking to different voters. So in electoral campaigns, we typically don't want to spend resources talking to people who don't support us, any non-supporters, and people who won't vote no matter what we say to convince them. So here you'll see in the slide on the very left, the strongest Republicans, and at the bottom, least likely to vote. We are not wanting to talk to those folks. Next slide. Thanks. So thinking about our capacity building phase, in the capacity building phase, we want to spend resources talking to people who will volunteer to help us and the people who will donate to help us.
Did I get you off? Sorry.
No, sorry, I think just my screen froze. But we're here. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm not able to advance. Okay, yes, sorry. Persuasion. So in the persuasion phase, we want to spend our resources talking to people who may or may not support us, but might support us if we ask them to. And then people who we have less information about, which you could see highlighted here in the magenta. And then finally coming to our turnout phase. In the turnout phase, we want to spend resources talking to people who will likely support us, but might only vote if we ask them to. And then the people we talk to in the earlier phases who confirmed their supports. That's part of the reason that during the capacity phase, we focus on getting those people who are going to volunteer for us, because during turnout phase, this is the time when we want to talk to the most number of voters as possible. So hopefully we've recruited the volunteers that we've needed to prepare for GOTV so that we can have a lot of conversations, both talking to the people who likely won't vote unless we ask them to, but also circling back again to all those people we talked to during capacity building and during persuasion to confirm their support and make sure that they have a plan to actually get out the vote. Cool, and Jess, I'll hand it off to you for what is GOTV?
Awesome. Yeah, so we have a quick question in the chat. Please feel free to ask your questions in the chat, but we super prefer the chat or the Q&A function. So you are welcome to find the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You'll probably see a little red button that says leave, don't hit that. But to the left of it, you'll find the Q&A box. You might need to hit the 3 dots that say more. For now, though, I'm happy to answer this question. The question is, will you send the meeting recording to those of us that are on the call? Yes, we will. We will send the recording to you. We will post it on our GOTV hub, which is where our GOTV workshop series information all lives. So you'll have access to it there. And we can also send it to people who signed up for the Mobilize as well. Great. What other questions do we have before we move on? All right. This is not your last chance to ask questions, so think about them, write them down, drop them in the Q&A, and we will keep moving on for now. So in this section, we'll talk specifically about what GOTV is, but first we need to define what we're talking about when we say GOTV. So at Arena, what we mean is the final few weeks or maybe even days, depending on how your election is structured in the campaign. But what's most important is it's the entire focus of the campaign just to turn out supporters for the candidate. So you're not doing kind of the other things that a campaign does. You're maybe not spending as much time raising money. You're probably not spending as much time making creative for your digital team. This is the time when everybody is focused on just kind of this one thing. So the GOTV period might look different depending on where you live, the size of your race, etc. But we have some recommendations. So our next question is, when does GOTV start? Let us know if you have a guess or from your own experience, at what point does GOTV start? You can drop it in the chat. Next week, right after Ohio's super early registration deadline, whenever early vote starts, 1 week before early or mail-in voting. Yeah, so I think we're all naming kind of different things. October 8th. We have a few recommendations here, but it's kind of up to your campaign to define when the GOTV period is. We'll give you the official definition first. So technically, the 2 weeks before election day, we kind of consider that the GOTV period. This is when those conversations that you have with voters stick in their minds. This is when what you say to someone on the door or the phones is really going to stay with them when they're making decisions about what to do, whether or not they're going to go vote, and how to think about things, whether or not they're going to vote for your candidate. So thinking about that 2 weeks, but like someone mentioned, maybe you have early voting in your state. Maybe mail voting already started. These are all kind of things that might make you start thinking about GOTV a little bit earlier. So you can also think about whenever early vote starts in your state. I think somebody put this in the chat, and I'm sorry, I can't find who it was. But somebody mentioned whenever early vote starts in your state, once people start voting, you need to start talking to them about voting for sure. And you really do need to prepare for this period because it's so important that you're maximizing those high value conversations that you're having with people, that you don't really want a learning curve when you're having those really, really effective conversations. You don't want to be kind of practicing. You don't want voters to be your guinea pig. So you do want to spend a lot of time preparing and training and practicing for GOTV. And typically that starts around, we said the end of September or beginning of October. That's when it has been done. We really strongly recommend planning for GOTV about 12 weeks out, which is about right now, so that you have enough time to make really informed and strategic decisions about how you're going to use your resources. Sorry to hear it, Milo. But don't worry, you're ahead of the curve. And you can successfully, I will say, you can successfully plan for GOTV a little bit further down the line. And I have seen campaigns definitely win, having had a little bit less time to prepare for GOTV, but it does give you more time to think things through, be a little bit less nervous as you're doing it. And you don't have the limits on your options if you start planning earlier. All right, so how is GOTV different from other phases of the campaign? Drop it in the chat. What have you experienced? What's different? Chaos. More asks, longer hours. Yeah, you do have a little bit of a different conversation. Maybe the conversation's easier, or maybe if you're someone that loves persuasion, maybe it's a little bit harder for you to not talk about all the reasons why someone should vote. Spend the most money and the most time. It is definitely the moment of truth. Maggie says you're spending less time on each convo, on each conversation. All of these things are correct. So you're generally busier and you're more tired. You will probably stop doing kind of those like fun extra things that you might be doing with your candidate. You might have been taking your candidate to chili cook-offs or going to parades. You're not doing that anymore. Now you're only talking to voters. And then you also have the increased attention on you from the outside. So you have more people paying attention to what you're doing. And this is great because it means that voters are listening and they're really tuned in, but it also means that there is a little bit more pressure. And, you know, you might have volunteers coming in at higher volumes, or maybe your partners are ready to coordinate, et cetera. So there's just kind of more going on from that. And like I just said, you might have increased external demands and increased scrutiny. So by external demands, I mean things like requests from donors to have meetings to talk through what your strategy is going to be, or maybe you might be having a bunch of requests flooding into your press at inbox that you need to start responding to. So you've got a lot of stuff that you might need to be doing. We've already talked about that there are messaging changes. So someone in the chat mentioned that you might think about not doing persuasion anymore, or really honing that message down to be very, very tight with how you're talking people through going to vote. We also have increased effect sizes of conversations. So we mentioned that each conversation matters a little bit more because people are paying more attention. Those conversations are more sticky, they're staying in their mind, and they're gonna start kind of like decaying, but you're so close to the end of the election that they don't really have time for the effect to wear off before the election happens. So each conversation really, really counts. And all of this is to say that what you do during GOTV just matters more. It doesn't mean that what you did prior to GOTV doesn't matter. It just means that your programming and the activities that you're doing during GOTV have a much larger impact on the minds of people who are going to go vote than they did before. So it's really important to think through how we can maximize all of our resources to make the biggest impact during GOTV. And this is where we'll kind of get into some additional things to think about and talk about how some of this is going to be related to additional pieces of our GOTV workshop series. So the first thing, and the reason why you're probably here with us, is thinking about planning. So the more intentionally we can plan, the more intentionally we can execute. And the more time we have to plan with a longer runway, the more time we have to collaborate. And this is going to naturally make our plan stronger because we're going to be able to get more feedback. We're going to be able to get additional eyes on it and make sure that we're not making, little mistakes, or maybe we're not overlooking a detail that someone has a perspective or experience on. So when you're thinking about planning, you're really going to think about what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, who you're going to say it to, how you're going to pay for it. This is a really important one, and the timing of when all of this is happening. So for what you're going to say, we're talking about GOTV messaging. So we actually do have quite a lot of very reliable data on messages that are effective and how to deliver those messages. But how do you know what that data is saying? And how do you interpret this data that was taken from many, many, many campaigns and understand which pieces of it are most applicable to the people that you're trying to talk to and the resources that you have to talk to them? So how do you translate that message? And like we talked about earlier, each campaign is different. So these best practices have to be tailored down to your campaign. You might have to make a decision, or you will have to make a decision about whether or not you're going to continue persuading people or switch to just a pure turnout. And there are a whole bunch of different factors that might influence how you think about that. So we have an entire session just on how to think about best practices in messaging, how to tailor them to your own specific context, and how to make decisions about what types of things end up in your scripts and what don't. We also have to think about targeting. So someone mentioned earlier that Candace just said you want to talk to reliable voters. That's almost always true, but there might be exceptions. There might be people that you want to add in or take out. So we have a whole session on targeting. And during that session, we talk through how you know who the best people are for your campaign to talk to, how you can determine what size of a universe to create, because if you have the voter file, you have access to every registered voter. How are you going to whittle that down to the exact sweet spot that you need? You also might find yourself in a situation where to hit that win number, you're not going to be able to talk to enough people. It might just be physically impossible for you to talk to everyone that you need to talk to in order to hit that number. So what are some strategies that you can use if you find yourself in that position? And then finally, once you start talking to people, sometimes you get nervous. Sometimes as GOTV is happening, you find yourself wondering, are we doing all this for nothing? Is this even working? And we can talk through how you might determine whether or not maybe you want to fine tune your universe. Maybe you want to have a universe adjustment, or maybe you got it right the first time because you're a wizard and you don't have to fine tune it at all. We'll talk through considerations for how to make those determinations too. That is going to be in the GOTV targeting and data management session. So you figured out who you're going to talk to. Now you need to know how to talk to them. We know that different types of people answer the phones than people who might be more likely to answer a text message. We know that serving digital ads to some people will work really well, but maybe other people aren't even going to be on YouTube. So you're not going to hit them with your YouTube ad. How are you going to decide which tactics you're going to use to talk to which people, and which ones you're going to layer on top of each other to make sure that as much as you can, a voter is hearing the same message across different types of mediums? And then finally, we hear this question a lot. How many passes through my universe should I do? How many times should I try to talk to these people? We'll talk through that too. And that is going to be, again, in the GOTV targeting and data management session. And then, not last, but definitely not least, once you've thought through kind of all of these types of considerations, it's time to look back at that budget. Hopefully you already have a campaign budget that you're working with. We'll give you a sample one in case you don't, but this session is really designed to take you through how you might adjust the budget down to the line item to figure out how you're going to spend. You're going to spend down to zero. That's the reality of a campaign. How are you going to spend all the way down to your last dollar? So projecting income is going to be really important, being able to figure out exactly how much you might be able to raise so that you know how much you can spend. Then you'll have to talk about the ways that you're going to be spending that money, maybe things that you need to buy. Are you going to buy tech tools? Are you going to buy a dialer? How are you going to prioritize these things if you're not able to afford everything that you want? Because that's the reality that most of us are going to be in. How are we going to make these decisions about what to buy first and what to put off? And then finally, how are you going to monitor this budget to make sure that everything's going the way that you thought it was going to go and you're not overspending? Nobody wants to overspend, but Also, if you underspend, that means that you left resources that you could have been using to talk to voters on the table. So you want to make sure you're not underspending either. You want to get all the way down to zero. We have a whole section to talk about that. And then finally, last and not least, GOTV calendaring. So thinking through in great detail what the milestones are, how to plan backwards from those, and how everything is going to fit together. We talked about the importance of planning and preparing. How much time is that actually going to take? How much time do you need to spend preparing versus executing? And what's the right balance for that? There are also times when programs need to start. You're not going to start your text messages for GOTV at the same time as you do your doors and your phone scripts. You're probably going to need to stagger the start for those. And so we'll talk through considerations for that. And then also we have a bunch of people that have been through GOTV a bunch of times. And we'll talk through how there are little hidden deadlines. Do you know when the meta ads deadline is, for example? What are the hidden deadlines and the milestones that you need to know about that might trip you up, that you might find out about and then have a day to address or something like that if you've never done before? So we'll talk through all of that in the GOTV calendaring session. What questions do y'all have? You can drop them in the Q&A. I think there's probably few enough of us that you can raise your hand to share if you'd like to, but it is being recorded. Okay. Brendan said, if your primary is coming up, what should be the first thing we focus on? Well, that's a really broad question, and I can't give you advice for your specific context, but I would want to make sure that I understand what actual milestones need to happen. So if you know you have your primary coming up in a certain number of weeks, count backwards from that, figure out when you need to start switching over into a different program. I can't give you advice on a specific campaign with a specific date, but after, if you have your calendar locked in, then I would want to look at that budget again, and I would want to make sure that my budget is right and that my calendar and my budget, the expectations that are in both of those two things, make sense. And then if that's true, you got to tell everyone on your campaign. You got to let your staff know if their schedule is going to change, etc. Okay. And we'll have a whole session on GOTV planning and all kinds of stuff. So you're definitely in the right place. And maybe if we could drop the link again, just to make sure everyone has it so you can see where to sign up for all the sessions in the series, that might be helpful. Okay. Thank you very much. Jessica, should I pass it? Are you ready?
Yeah, let's go.
Dun, 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 dun. The workshop series.
Yeah, speaking of the link, we have a workshop series this week where we are actually going to dive into all of these. So this is a space for you to bring your scripts, your budgets, your spreadsheets, and you're going to have time to do hands-on work on all of your GOTV planning. So we start tomorrow afternoon with drafting your GOTV plan, the process for making a multi-departmental GOTV plan to guide your programming. Tomorrow evening, we will have GOTV calendaring. So that is calendaring out the key milestones during GOTV, how to calendar and how to plan for them. On Wednesday in the afternoon, we'll have a session on messaging and scripts. That will be evidence-based best practices for GOTV messaging and scripts. We will have in that evening targeting and data management. Again, evidence-based practices for turnout targeting, tracking, and managing your data. And then we'll round out the week on Thursday with budgeting for GOTV, best practices for budgeting during the fast-paced GOTV timeline. And then we'll close out the week with some time with our friends at Higher Ground Labs for tech stack selection. So you'll get to hear from Higher Ground Labs about the technology and tools that you can deploy during GOTV to strengthen your program. So I know many of us here are have already applied, have already registered. We love you for it. If you have not yet applied, there is still time. You could do that tonight, and we will review your application and make sure you have everything that you need to get into the training. So we hope that you will apply and to see you in sessions later this week. That said, any questions as we close out about GOTV, about the sessions, about joining, about applying?
Well, and I don't know if we're still recording, but it might be worth stopping the recording.